Hello everyone. 2023 is officially over and probably has been for a while by the time I get this video out. And this year, along with last year, have been pretty incredible years for movies. And there was a lot of stuff going on in 2023 especially. 2023 was the year of the writer strikes, actor strikes, Barbenheimer, not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, but 8 superhero movies. Do y'all understand what Scorsese is talking about now? It was the year of Disney losing $1 billion, the resurgence of the biopic, Part 1 movies, big franchise box office flop, big franchise box office flop, big franchise box office flop, a historical big franchise box office flop. It was the year the comic book movie may have officially gone the way of the Western and the Roadshow musical, and after a 15-year-long iron grasp over Hollywood may have finally died out, paving the way for a national craving for more original, smaller budget films. And as the comic book movie dies out, we may also be seeing the seeds of Hollywood's next big trend being planted, which is most likely going to be the video game movie. Big fucking yikes. But as I said earlier, this was an incredible, varied, wonderful year for movies, and I saw a whopping 74 of them that were released this year. I'm going to go through each and every one of them in worst to best order, briefly giving my thoughts on them, and be warned, these are my opinions and exclusively my opinions. Just because I'm recording my voice and editing it into a YouTube video, it doesn't make my opinion any more valid than anyone else's. So if I rated a movie you really liked low, or a movie you didn't like high, I don't know, feel free to leave a hateful comment that I probably won't read. I also want to preface this by saying I unfortunately missed out on a few highly talked about movies, like How to Have Sex, Perfect Days, The Zone of Interest, Dream Scenario, just because they simply weren't playing anywhere near me or don't hit streaming until mid-2024, which is a bummer since each of those films looked really great and I probably would have loved them. I also skipped out on Wonka, Wish, and The Flash, just because I had zero interest in each of them. So now, onto the list. Rebel fucking Moon. Where to even begin? Rebel Moon is a $200 million Star Wars fan film from Zack Snyder, which is also a complete ripoff of The Seventh Samurai, and it is one of the worst movies I have ever seen. I don't have anything against Zack Snyder. I know he has quite a rabid fan base and hater base. I like 300, his Dawn of the Dead remake. I think Watchmen is great, and there are elements to his DC outings that I like despite not liking any of those movies. But this is just a whole new low. This is one of the ugliest looking films of the year, one of the worst screenplays of the year, one of the worst paced and plotted movies maybe ever, and this is just part 1. This is like if Neil Breen or Tommy Wiseau had a budget. This is one of the most comedically inept films I think I've ever seen. It's erupting with so much of Snyder's laughable self-seriousness, with dozens of references to rape and sexual assault, and he clearly shot it for an R-rated violence level, which just makes everything so much goofier because of how hard it was cut down. He wanted this to be something big so bad, and it just makes looking at the final product even more laughable. There are so many embarrassing attempts at world building as well, with some of the worst usages of exposition I've ever seen. None of the action is even remotely interesting because of how much Snyder overuses slow motion. This whole movie feels like he's unintentionally parodying himself. This shit is really bad. It's like Battlefield Earth level trash. You just know Snyder bros are going to be grasping at the craziest of straws trying to defend this film. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. I'm really hoping that someday Eddie Murphy gets his Adam Sandler, Robert Pattinson actor redemption arc. Candy Cane Lane is very shit. It starts off as a potentially fun, Lifetime-esque movie on a slightly larger budget, but then quickly devolves into a really shitty, unfunny, sloppily made, and lifeless Christmas Jumanji riff. It's genuinely excruciating to sit through at points because of just how unfunny it is, and there is no reason why this should ever have been 2 hours long. There is nothing of substance here.
Spooky, scary skeletons and shivers down your...
So boring. This is a remarkably poorly put together mess of a film. It makes the 2003 Eddie Murphy original look like a Gremlins level gateway horror masterpiece. This shit should have stayed as a Disney Plus original.
Was that the bite of 87?
Now, if you want to hear my full ramblings about this film, I made a whole video on it a while back, so I won't bother to restate everything I said there. But basically, this is one of the most diarrhea dogshit scripts ever. Like, ever. It insists on trying to be more of a drama than a horror movie, where most of the runtime is spent on the main character asleep, and functions entirely on cramming in as many references to the games as possible, because otherwise, as a movie, it completely fails on every single front. Two Nun, Two Nunner is the latest installment in everyone's favorite semi-Catholic propaganda horror franchise. This time, our heroes are up against the most terrifying threat of the Conjuring universe that was already defeated twice in a sequel and a prequel, but for some reason we're still supposed to take the Nun seriously. This film manages to have a whopping 2 whole types of horror scenes that it keeps repeating. Wow, there's something going on behind the characters. Wow, there's a sudden loud noise and then something jumps out at the camera. This entire movie is rendered so meaningless when the Nun's inclusion in The Conjuring 2 and Annabelle 2 completely undoes everything this movie works towards by default. This is one of the most absurdly pointless films I've seen in ages. It's unbelievable how lazy these movies are. What Marvel has done for blockbusters, the Conjuring universe has done for horror. I guess I liked it better than the first film though, since I was actually awake the entire runtime.
The bear, it fucking did cocaine.
In order for a movie like Cocaine Bear to work, I feel like you could only go about it 2 ways. Either completely ham it up, fully embrace the absurdity of its concept, have the bear be a guy in a suit running around brutally murdering people like a slasher movie, really crank up the blood and gore, just be crazy and fun. Or you could take yourself seriously and play it straight, attempt to make a really great monster movie akin to Jaws, Tremors, or The Host. And this movie tries to do both, and it fails so fucking bad. There is absolutely no talent to the filmmaking here. It looks like a TV movie. The titular Cocaine Bear is barely in it, and when it is, they try cutting away from it and around it as much as possible to save on the budget, because a big CG bear is expensive. It's not funny at all. It looks like shit. 90% of the film is people just walking around in the woods spouting off unfunny banter. Literally every single moment of the film that is worth it is already in the trailers. Straight up dog shit ass movie. At 30 movies in at this point and like several TV shows, I feel like it's inexcusable for Marvel to put out a movie of this embarrassing quality level. It looks like total shit. It's a visual disaster of unfinished effects, wonky green screens. It's incredibly overlong, dull, generic as hell, and it's a film that solely exists on setting up dozens more spin-offs, sequels, and future Avengers movies with Kang, but we all know how that turned out. Really bad movie.
Put some Windex.
Oh, Gus, please, please.
Now this is a weird one. It's the third and definitely final chapter of the Big Fat Greek Wedding trilogy. The first, I think, is a great, very fun early 2000s romantic comedy, and I don't think it ever should have gotten a sequel, let alone a third film. And yeah, this was pretty rough. It's a very poorly made film. It's poorly shot. Any scene that takes place at night is like so comically dark because they just didn't know how to light it right. The editing is genuinely awful. Scenes just kind of begin and end without any sense of like pacing. It's a disaster for sure, but it definitely still feels like a passion project. So it does have some heart that comes through, which prevents me from putting it in like the bottom tier movies of the year, but still not very good.
Fuck them kids. Fuck the kids?
This was like a Peacock original horror movie or something that I saw way at the beginning of the year. I remember it being kind of boring and not very scary at all. That's about all I have to say about this one. If you told ChatGTP to AI generate the plot to a superhero origin story movie, I feel like it would entirely be this. This has got to be like the most unoriginal movie ever made. Like, every single aspect about this film has been taken from or done significantly better in other superhero movies, like the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man or the first Iron Man. It's painfully boring, obvious. I liked the political commentary about gentrification it was going for at the beginning, and I liked the family aspect of the story, but it trades out everything interesting it had going for it for the most generic, weightless, substanceless CG overload superhero bullshit everyone's already seen a million times. It's so boring.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents.
Now this was a bit of a disappointing one. Paint follows Carl Nargle, played by Owen Wilson, who is essentially just Bob Ross, but not actually Bob Ross. And it's like a spiritual biopic, but also like a parody of Bob Ross. And it's like a love letter to Bob Ross, but it's also really disrespectful and kind of insults Bob Ross. Like, he's like the butt of the joke the entire movie. And it's made with all the comedic sensibilities of a 5-minute SNL or Funny or Die sketch that goes on for what feels like 3 hours, but it's actually only 90 minutes. It's not good. Megan is Blumhouse's latest PG-13 horror romp made to appeal to Gen Z demographics and sensibilities, which means it's really bad, uninspired, and not scary at all. Maybe if it was at least really gory, it could have made up for how uninteresting it is, but the PG-13 rating really kills it. And the extended R-rated cut on streaming hardly adds anything of note. Not good.
The Transformers, more than meets the eye.
I talked about this movie at length in part 3 of my Transformers series retrospective, so go there if you really want to know my full thoughts on this movie, but to summarize what I said there, it's shit. I had pretty much zero connection to anything that was going on since I haven't seen WandaVision, Miss Marvel, or any of the other Marvel shows, and I forgot everything that happened in Captain Marvel, so like the majority of this was lost on me, but still, I don't think I'd have much of a different opinion on it, even if I have seen all that. The Marvels is one of the most plastic, substanceless, lazy films in this tired franchise. Also somehow manages to be one of the cheapest looking films in the MCU, despite it being one of the most expensive. There's real glimpses of fun in short bursts every now and then. I loved the stop motion comic book scene at the beginning, and I liked the big cat set piece, but pretty much nothing else. It's glaringly obvious that this was recut and reshot to shit. There's so many choppy editing choices, egregiously bad, unfinished looking visual effects, and almost student film level direction at points, which is inexcusable considering the budget it was made for. So many plot threads go nowhere, so many underdeveloped ideas, perhaps the most bland and generic villain in the entire MCU, and some absolutely excruciating exposition scenes to top it all off. Entire characters and scenes just have no resolution to them. Shout out to Aman Vellani for being the only actor to give a shit in this entire movie. For like 80% of the runtime, Brie Larson could not have given less of a fuck about this role. But I mean, as if she's even given anything to work with anyway. The film's biggest saving grace is the runtime. At under 2 hours, it's the perfect length for the type of film this is. And it's a breath of fresh air from some of Marvel's recent 2.5 hour long slogfests. But the short length isn't enough to save this incredibly messy and disjointed film. Missed potential more than anything.
Oh, scary! Oh, shiver my timbers!
If Blue Beetle is pretty much every single superhero movie ever, then this is like every single horror movie ever. Incredibly generic, super fucking bland. I really appreciate the Indian representation, but this was like eating a single piece of sliced cheese in between 2 soggy pieces of white bread and calling it a sandwich. John Woo is clearly having a lot of fun behind the camera here, and it's such a shame that he's stuck with such a dud of a screenplay to work with. For the most part, the film plays out like some sort of conservative wet dream, with an angry white dude fed up with the world who takes revenge into his own hands and enacts his vengeance on some of the most cartoonish Mexican gangster stereotypes ever put to film. At least if the action was great, it might have been worth it, but it's genuinely kind of shit. The opening scene is great, but the action that follows that takes what feels like 8 hours to get to looks pretty bad, with uninspired choreography and zero personality. Also the most anticlimactic finale of the year. Legitimately embarrassing stuff, especially considering what John Wick 4 was able to achieve earlier in the year. And even that one fight scene in The Killer being leagues better than anything in this. The choice to make the film nearly entirely wordless is more of a handicap than an interesting creative choice. It's almost impossible to care about anyone or anything going on since nobody will just fucking talk. Kid Cudi's entire character could have been cut out and literally nothing would have changed. It's all more disappointing than anything. This could have easily been a new Christmas classic if it were trimmed way down and had better action and a stronger narrative hook, but it's just so bland. This is basically a 90-minute thriller stretched out to 2 hours. It's fun in brief points and it has a nice atmosphere, but like there's nothing of note, nothing notable about this movie.
I think we can make Sound of Freedom the Uncle Tom's Cabin of 21st century slavery.
The insane political discourse surrounding this film is in no way warranted at all. From what people were saying, I was expecting this to be a straight-up conservative propaganda piece akin to Patriots Day or American Sniper, but really it's just a pretty solid, if not kind of bland, thriller with a harrowing human trafficking angle to it that's important to shine a light on. The Christian aspect is here, but hardly intrusive outside of like 3 lines of dialogue. Human trafficking is something so unambiguously evil, so it's weird that there was such a political divide over it in this movie. QAnon, Donald Trump, the Clintons, and American political parties of any kind are not even mentioned here at all, so I fail to understand what like a lot of people were complaining about with this movie. I was actually planning on rating this higher up until the admittedly eye-rolling special message during the credits where Jim Caviezel, completely straight-faced to the audience, says that this film is the quote-unquote Uncle Tom's Cabin of the modern age, which left a very bad taste in my mouth. But removing that, the movie is fine. People need to stop crying about it.
Do the Mario! Swing your arms from side to side. Come on, it's time to go! Do the Mario!
This is about everything I would have expected from an Illumination Nintendo collaboration. It's the cinematic equivalent when you had to help out at your 6 or 7-year-old brother's birthday at Chuck E. Cheese, and you're just non-stop bombarded by annoying children, hopped up on sugar, surrounded by flashing lights and loud noises and overstimulation. It's about as safe and sanitized as a movie could possibly ever be. There's nothing special about it, nothing stands out from it. As soon as it introduces something potentially fun and interesting, it's immediately moved on to something else because the pace is so rushed, it feels like you're fast-forwarding through it. It's so bland, it's so uninspired. It has, I think, the most generic and obvious needle drops of all time. Just like the Five Nights at Freddy's movie, its only purpose of existing is to cram in as much fan service down the low attention span audience's throat to distract them from the fact that there is absolutely nothing of substance happening on screen. There is nothing of note here, it's just so fucking lame. I can already feel the heat from the neckbeards coming after me for putting this movie so low on the list because they love to die on the Super Mario Bros. Movie hill for some reason. And I know they're going to use the "it's just a kid's movie" excuse, but I feel like by saying that and using that excuse, you're essentially acknowledging the fact that the film is of lesser quality, with worse writing, worse pacing, and more problems. Ignoring the fact that movies like The Lion King, any early Pixar movie, Prince of Egypt, Spirited Away, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Iron Giant, Coraline, Spider-Verse, etc. are all also kids' movies, but can be equally enjoyed by adults because they still don't forget to just be great movies on their own. Not to mention how reportedly 45% of the audience for this movie were between the ages 18 to 45. So most of the audiences aren't even the fucking babies the movie is intended for, but teenagers to middle-aged adults because they are the ones who are nostalgic for Mario. I think if grown-ass people are the main people going to see this movie, Illumination can do better than this.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
I really did not hate this. It's weirdly more akin to like a Daily Wire produced Christian propaganda piece with more vomit, more so than the transgressive and provocative original was, and it lacks anything interesting to say about faith and religion the same way the original did as well, but I thought it delivered enough thrills over a short enough runtime to keep me engaged. Still better than The Nun 2, but Saw X is the far superior 2023 horror legacy sequel, which we'll get to much higher up on the list.
You better pay attention now, 'cause I'm the boogeyman.
This was like a really dull, really boring, really bland horror flick. I don't remember anything that happens in it. I just remember it being like every horror movie ever.
Like snorting Scooby Snacks was a good idea, Scoob.
Lionsgate was wilding, dropping this heavily October, Halloween-themed horror film in the middle of July, on the same day as Barbie and Oppenheimer. No wonder I've never heard anyone else talk about this movie. It has some great aspects to it, but it's mostly kind of bad. I really like the Coraline-inspired adult fairy tale vibes it was going for. I just wish it went further with its aesthetic and cut way down on the dim as fuck color grading. I could barely see anything during like the last 20 minutes. It weirdly felt kind of amateurish or student film-like for a lot of it. There were some strange editing choices, wonky close-ups, and some bizarrely cut dialogue scenes. It makes sense that this was a directorial debut. Homelander was good in it. It has a solid lead child performance and some fun monster stuff, although the design was really uninspired for the monster. It kind of looked like every J-horror long-haired scary girl ever. It's not the worst thing ever, although when Barbarian exists, which has very similar subject matter to it, there's no real reason to watch this.
What are you doing in there, James? Huh? Where do you think you're going, you little baby?
Between this and his previous film Possessor, I can say that I've grown to really dislike Brandon Cronenberg. He's really great at coming up with potentially very interesting science fiction concepts that would work very well as like an hour-long episode of Black Mirror, but he always does the lamest possible thing with his concepts, and Infinity Pool is another example of that. It is a great-looking movie at least, and there are a few really standout moments, but overall it's super lame. It tries really hard to be edgy and provocative. Mia Goth, who I normally love, is absolutely degrading to watch in this. She was doing some sort of attempt at like a Southern Belle accent, and it was just so annoying. It's very obvious and meandering, and like I said already, just really lame. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's not good either.
Don't come to my house or else I'll suck your dick. Blood. I'll suck your blood. Shit.
I wish y'all could have seen how far my jaw dropped in that theater when this actually started with the freeze frame. So I bet you all are wondering how I got into this situation type opening. So much of this film is genuinely very fun, which is why it's so frustrating whenever it isn't. I wish it stuck more to what it was great at, which was being a fun 80s grindhouse, 50s hammer horror inspired action romp gorefest with two terrific leads, Nicholas Hoult and Cage, and trimmed way the fuck down on everything else, which is primarily the police procedural shit and the horribly miscast Awkwafina and that wannabe comedy version of the Departed mob subplot. A lot of the narration felt pretty pointless and distracting too, as I mentioned earlier. It's not the best, but it's entertaining enough in short bursts.
Where did you come from? Where did you go?
This was a fun little semi-sequel to Searching from 2018, a movie that I really like. And while this definitely isn't as good as Searching was, I thought it was pretty okay. It's very well edited, and the internet aspects to the story felt very authentic. It's very stressful, intense, engaging. What really undoes it for me is the last act, which I think it really falls apart in. But otherwise, it's pretty solid. I can't say I'm really a fan of the Insidious franchise at all. I like the first movie, but none of the others. However, The Red Door, presumably the final film in this series, was interesting. It's generally unspecial from a filmmaking standpoint. It definitely lacks that James Wan flair from the first film, and really uninspired with its scares. Tell me if you've heard this one. The music drowns out and the characters slowly look around and then something pops up and ear rapes you with a screech sound effect. But honestly, I was really surprised by how actually invested I was in the film. It works pretty well when it's focused on the estranged father-son plotline, and Wilson delivers a great performance. It has a hard time blending the emotional beats with the usual demon jump scare Insidious formula, but with how everything plays out in the film thematically and how it all wraps up, especially ending with Ghosts sung by Patrick Wilson, it really won me over in the end. This was not quite the total Star Wars Rise of Skywalker level 50-car train wreck from Disney that I was expecting. There is actually some stuff in this film that I enjoyed. Will I ever watch it again? Absolutely not. Not ever again. But it was not the worst. Dial of Destiny is what happens when you try your absolute best to encapsulate the feeling and energy of the first 3 indie films, but without the incredible level of filmmaking craft Spielberg brought to the table, it's basically just a pointless film, especially when the series already has a legacy sequel that basically does everything this film does thematically but better. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is overhated. None of the action scenes here are particularly impressive. Most of them try to work around the fact that the lead star is fucking ancient and cannot do much outside waddle around during these set pieces. There isn't much of a feeling of globetrotting at all. It's an incredibly repetitive film as well. It also looks kinda really bad. There's been enough talk already about the de-aging, which at its best, when it's not moving and properly lit, looks pretty good, and at its worst, looks like a Snapchat filter. The whole opening train scene that goes on for like 20 minutes looked like a cutscene from a video game. This is also a dreadfully overlong film. There's no reason for this to be 2.5 hours long. Most of the bad with this film is somewhat made up by the last 15 to 20 minutes, which are genuinely pretty awesome, but as a whole, it's a total boring, overlong mess.
Lonely, I'm Mr. Lonely.
This was super cute. It's pretty looking, I almost cried a few times, but also immensely creatively bankrupt, painfully surface level with its world building and commentary, and has a generally sloppily told storyline, but makes up for it with a solid emotional core. I don't hate it by any means, but it's not particularly great either. Also, what the fuck was up with those titles? I recognized them instantly as the default Adobe Premiere Pro titles with like a shadow backdrop. I don't know how they got past the editing room.
We can't go on together with suspicious minds.
Now this could be a more controversial ranking, especially considering what the next movie that I ranked higher than this is. But man, Priscilla just did not click with me. I'm honestly not a big fan of Sofia Coppola. I think the majority of her movies are all style and no substance. The ones I've seen at least are very vapid, which comes with the territory of being a Nepo baby. But aside from that, I felt about the same from Priscilla as I did her other films. It's a movie that begins and ends and you feel like nothing happened. It makes such a fascinating companion piece with 2022's genuinely insane Elvis, with that film unintentionally perfectly illustrating how little of a part Priscilla was in Elvis's life. I seriously can't remember if she even spoke in that film, versus how Elvis being the center of Priscilla's entire existence is shown here. Sofia Coppola is definitely showing off behind the camera. She beautifully captures every moment, but I wish I just found it more engaging. At a certain point, it felt like the movie was just like the same 4 scenes on a loop. Like seriously, how many times are we gonna see Priscilla call Elvis while he's away, only for him to tell her she can't visit him? I'm sure it's completely candid and true to life, but I wish it had more of a narrative hook. It feels like this film had maybe 40 to 50 minutes of really interesting plot, and it just stretched it out so far past when it stops being interesting. If anything, I spent the runtime wishing I just read Priscilla's book, Elvis and I, instead. I appreciated it shining a light on this story, but I'm never going to watch this again.
Sell their houses to who, Ben? Fucking Aquaman!
Okay, hear me out. I will say that the first Aquaman film from 2018 is one of my most treasured guilty pleasures. I love that movie to death. I think it's fucking awesome. I genuinely believe it to be the golden standard of what a comic book movie should strive to be. I love Aquaman, so I did definitely enjoy this way more than the average person. The studio meddling is unfortunately apparent as hell here. You can easily tell this was supposed to be a much bigger movie than it was, but the endless production hell, studio interference, the reshoots, the re-edits really fucked it. James Wan is at least trying to make the best of a bad situation. There's lots of fun action, over-the-top comic book sensibilities, wacky creatures, a Texas Chainsaw Massacre reference, and a dubstep remix of Born to Be Wild in the end credits. It's a huge mess, but the fun factor is still here in parts. There's a really great dynamic between Momoa and Wilson. The film's always at its best when it's just them two together, but it never reaches the heights of the first film's Shakespearean underwater action extravaganza epic. But it isn't the most terrible thing. It's not a horrible way to kill 2 hours. I don't know. TikTok made a much bigger fucking deal about this movie than it really was. This was one of the most overrated, overhyped films of the year, but I still liked it. I was constantly flipping back and forth between loving this film, liking it, appreciating it, and really disliking it at points, but I don't know, the ending really sold me on it. Saltburn is very obvious and meandering, but it's that same superficiality that I think works strongly in its favor. It was such a uniquely bizarre psychosexual thriller. It's kind of crazy that this was playing in a megaplex with Disney's Wish and the Hunger Games playing across from me. Great unexpected twists, it's beautifully shot, Kyogen fucking kills it per usual. It's also genuinely disgusting and wildly explicit at points, which is nice. But just like Infinity Pool, it tries way too hard to be provocative. But what's here isn't bad, and I had a good time with it. From this point on, all these movies are ones that I enjoyed for the most part, but aren't like the greatest thing ever. I still think they're worth checking out, just not like top of the priority watch list level good.
What the hell is even that?
Now this is a crazy fucking movie. When Evil Lurks is an Argentinian horror film that absolutely relishes in its brutality. It's one of the craziest takes I've seen on the classic demonic possession story, exorcism type shit that's been done to death, but this movie really freshens it up. I think the film really peaks in the first 30 to 40 minutes. It kind of bottoms out after that, and also there aren't really like any likable characters, but still there's so many crazy moments and imagery in this movie that I still think about. So I'd say it's a pretty damn solid horror flick.
Destiny has brought me this lamb chop.
This was one of the bigger disappointments of the year for me, but it's still far from terrible. All the pieces of what could have formed a masterpiece are here. Joaquin, per usual, is giving 110%. And he does a brilliant job of highlighting some of the more bizarre aspects of Napoleon's private life and personality. There are some really great ideas and themes at play. I love the controlling, highly dysfunctional dynamic between Napoleon and Josephine, which I wish the film focused more on. The battle scenes, of course, are a total visual spectacle and easily the best part of the movie, but overall this is a very messy, disjointed, and confused film. The script needed far more fine-tuning, and it possibly needed a much better filmmaker at the helm, which is weird to say about the guy who did Alien and Blade Runner, but Ridley is inconsistent to say the least. Honestly, I'm excited to see how the eventual streaming release of Scott's 4-hour director's cut turns out. I feel like it'll be the perfect chance to expand on much of the more interesting aspects of the story and fix many rushed feeling scenes early on. Because what we get here is not much more than a few spectacular sequences, a great lead performance, and many interesting ideas that just do not come together at all. My expectations for Gladiator 2 are not the highest.
Oh shit. You mind if I praise the Lord? Go ahead.
Weirdly, I kinda love this. It's comically over the top and excessive in the best way at points. It's mostly self-aware, and Russell Crowe really hams it up with his massively entertaining lead performance. It does what the Conjuring movies should do and just completely abandons the based on a true story moniker and embraces full horror maximalism. There's lots of fun, stylish Sam Raimi and Evil Dead inspired direction, and some wacky possession shenanigans. It's a fun time if you got an hour and a half to kill. If nothing else, it's worth it just for all the scenes of Crowe riding around Italy in his Vespa. He looked so goofy on that thing. It's exciting, it's atmospheric, it's a good, fun time. M. Night Shyamalan's newest is a very solid, very engaging one-location thriller. It's short and sweet, it's very well shot and directed and acted. Take this ranking with a grain of salt. I am more partial towards Shyamalan as a director. I tend to enjoy his movies more and forgive them more just because he's such a goof. He's a real auteur who just exclusively makes movies for himself, but can keep doing it because they're so cheap and they always make tons of money. And Knock at the Cabin is definitely an example of that. It can be pretty stupid at points, but to me it's kind of endearing. I mean, I genuinely loved Old, and that should tell you everything you need to know. So I enjoyed this movie despite its kinda shitty writing. Dave Bautista also definitely carries a lot of it on his massive shoulders. He's really good in this. It's kinda crazy how remarkably better this film handles the whole no talking gimmick, better than Silent Night did. No One Will Save You is essentially the final act of Signs, but as a feature film, and I really enjoyed it. It's very thrilling, genuinely scary at points. I think it's really well shot and directed. It's really fantastic how well the film pulls off basically telling its entire story through visuals and having no fully spoken lines. It's short and sweet, tense and scary. If you love alien invasion movies, this is definitely one of the best I've seen. It's a good time.
No one told you life was gonna be this way.
A nearly 2.5 hour outcry from Mr. Robot Guy about the importance of physical media, and it's a Netflix movie. Leave the World Behind is very preachy. It's kinda obvious, it's dumb as hell when you cut through all the stylish direction and great performances. It's also deeply hypocritical and scummy due to the fact it was produced by Obama, i.e. the president who dropped more bombs on the Middle East than any other president before and after, resulting in more civilian casualties than a million 9/11s. But it's okay, because he's a super rad, awesome leftist. But all that aside, I had a lot of fun with it. It's very entertaining and engaging. It kept me invested, and I thought it was thoroughly intense at points, which is what you'd want from a movie like this. I swear if M. Night Shyamalan directed this, all you nerds would be saying it's one of the best of the year. I gotta say, between this movie and Baldur's Gate 3, it's been a damn great year for Dungeons & Dragons fans. Now this movie was a big surprise. It's genuinely exciting, it has great characters, very fun and creative action set pieces, and it isn't 3 hours long for no reason. What a surprise! It's a fun, simple adventure romp that's nothing groundbreaking but isn't trying to be. It's very content with just being itself. It gets a lot better as it goes along, and it's more fun if you're a D&D fan, but overall, pretty great movie. For all its somewhat clunky exposition dumps and a bit of an overlong runtime, Dead Reckoning Part 1 once again proves that Mission Impossible is absolutely the best action blockbuster franchise we have right now. Aside from John Wick, of course, which isn't nearly as long running, Tom Cruise and team deliver yet another phenomenal action spectacle that proves why the theater-going experience is the best way to possibly experience a movie. If the sound ain't making my ears ring by the end of it, it ain't worth it. It succeeds at being just an awesome action spectacle with a great espionage storyline, and some really exceptional set pieces, as to be expected with this franchise. This series is a gift that keeps on giving. I'm very excited to see how Part 2 tops this one, and I hope we get 10 more of these movies afterward.
Jesus Christ! I love you, God!
So sweet, it'll give you a sugar rush. I was really impressed with this film, and I'm bummed it didn't get a bigger reception when it came out. I think it's really remarkable how well this film handles its themes of female puberty and religion, and I think it'll become a really foundational film for a lot of people in the coming years. Rachel McAdams, Benny Safdie, and Kathryn Bates per usual kill it. It's so full of life and energy, it's a truly wonderful little movie.
This year, there will be no leftovers.
Now this was way better than I thought it'd be. I'd even say this is an instant holiday classic. It has a really surprising, great whodunit mystery that actually kept me guessing, some great gore, fun social media, internet age commentary. It does a way better job at revamping the standard slasher formula for Gen Z demographics, way better than any of the new Scream movies in my opinion. This is by far one of the best modern slashers in the past decade or so, and I'm hoping we get more sequels to it because it's a total blast. Speaking of surprises, I enjoyed this way more than I thought I would have. I can't really say I'm a huge fan of the Hunger Games films, although I do think it's definitely the best franchise that came out of the whole 2010s young adult adaptation craze. And I think The Ballad of Songbird and Snakes is probably the best one. It's a really great looking film and a really interesting character study. I know a lot of people complained about the length and the weird structure where it could have easily been split into a part 1, part 2 movie, but I think how it's structured really makes it stand out more so among the other films. I don't know, I just had a really good time with this one. I thought it was pretty good.
Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn. Dead by dawn.
I gotta say, shout out to the parents in the row in front of me when I saw this in theaters, who brought their 3 4 to 6 year old looking kids to this and then left after 30 minutes. Evil Dead Rise never tries to stride above or evolve from the usual Evil Dead formula of possessions, vulgar deadite mayhem, and buckets of gore, but the urban apartment setting as well as the family-oriented character dynamics does add a lot of new charm. It never comes close to topping Evil Dead 2013's visceral intensity, which by the way, that film is the world record holder for most fake blood ever used in a movie, but it has some good Scream-worthy moments of its own. Outside of one hilarious callback to Evil Dead 2, a lot of the slapstick elements of the previous films is lost, and it tries to take itself more seriously, which I found disappointing, but the moment-to-moment thrills are still here. It's a fun time, but I did keep feeling like it could have been so much more than it was. I'm really glad that this movie did very well. I'm hoping Evil Dead becomes a new yearly horror series where each entry is set in a new location. A military base, a police station, a hospital, the NASA International Space Station. Call that shit Evil Dead Space. Instant $100 million opening weekend. Hollywood needs to hire me. Now this is a pretty solid, very effective historical biopic that shines a light on the completely forgotten artist in history. It's a thoroughly engaging drama that's given lots of life and energy by Stephen Williams' direction and a knockout lead performance from Kelvin Harrison. It's well made, the production design and costumes are lavish. It's a great story, albeit a bit standard. It doesn't stride too far away from your usual biopic isms, but I really had a good time with it. Pretty awesome movie. Now, from here on out, I thought these next movies are pretty great, and I definitely recommend checking them out.
Freight train, going so fast.
Now this is a very unconventional film from Wes Anderson. Of course, all his usual tropes are here with his extremely distinct visual style, quirkiness, and fast dialogue, but this is a real weird one. It's far more experimental than what he usually does. It's extremely meta, and it feels like there's a lot to pick at and uncover. It was a very interesting choice to have the events of the movie framed within a play, giving everything a really unique theatrical quality to it. I really enjoyed how the story unfolded, and of course, it looks absolutely gorgeous. It took longer than it usually did for a Wes Anderson film to win me over, but eventually it really did.
You know I said that I am better now, better now.
From beginning to end, Theater Camp is just a damn good time. It's such a fun, laid-back comedy with a lot of heart. It has a ton of personality, it's genuinely hysterical, so many lovable characters, it's everything you'd want from a movie like this. This is yet another big surprise from this year. As someone with really no prior love for this franchise, I thought Mutant Mayhem was kind of fucking awesome. It's definitely one of the more inspired Spider-Verse riffs out there when it comes to its animation. I absolutely adore how this movie looks. It's a kid's movie, but it isn't afraid to be absolutely disgusting with some of its imagery. The people look weird and grotesque, New York looks like a post-apocalyptic hellscape, all the mutants are so distinct and nasty. It borders on actual body horror at points. Think the same visual aesthetic as Good Time, but as a kid's animated movie. The action is great, all the voice actors did fantastic jobs. I love its themes and messages. It's all standard, love yourself, it's okay to be different stuff, but it's presented very well here. It's exciting, it's fun, it's very short. All around, it's a really great movie.
Ma! Mum! 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 Mummy! Mummy!
With each new film, Ari Aster pushes further and further how low he can get the cinema score to be from general audiences. Beau is Afraid, a 3-hour-long surrealist Freudian epic, is undoubtedly his most polarizing, and I think it will end up as his most beloved in like 10 to 20 years probably. The movie strides that very thin line between bold and ambitious and obnoxious and self-indulgent, jutting back and forth across that line like a metronome. Part of it feels like a potential movie of the decade contender, and part of it feels like a bloated, overlong mess. But for all of its missteps and flaws, mainly with its pacing, I'm just stoked that a film this wild and original was ever given a wide release. Like, I had to drive a fucking hour to see Poor Things. It's far more in line with movies like Synecdoche, New York, or I'm Thinking of Ending Things, than with Ari Aster's more standard horror outings. The world through the eyes of Beau is a sickening, oppressive, and utterly horrifying place where anxiety and paranoia have completely altered the reality he lives in. In a way, this might just be Ari's scariest film yet because it shows just how broken some people can become. It's degrading and exhausting following a man who's solely motivated by guilt and shame, but rightfully so. Ari does an extraordinary job at grounding you within the perspective of a man so ripped apart by fear and anxiety, torn to shreds by decades of endless guilt-tripping and pressures inflicted on him by his mother, all perfectly captured by Joaquin Phoenix, who is just so good. But it is a very, very flawed movie. The first 40 minutes to an hour remain the height of Ari Aster's filmography so far, as well as some of the best stuff of the year. It has such a wonderful feeling of rising action and excitement with each new development, like the birthday boy stabbed man, the musical back and forth with Beau's elusive neighbor, the entire must-drink water sequence. It's just wonderful, wonderful stuff from one of this generation's best new voices in film. I love the part after with Nathan Lane and Amy Ryan as well, but then Beau gets lost in the woods, and so does every sense of progression and story development with it. As much as I love so much of the imagery and thematic elements of the second half, the play and the attic segments are massive highlights. It just goes on for just too damn long, which is ultimately its biggest detriment. I really don't believe that this film needed to be 3 hours long. It feels like a director's cut or an extended edition, and there is a really perfect 2-hour-long film buried within everything that's going on in this. I still love it a ton, and I'm so pumped a movie this ambitious was left totally uncut and released nationwide, but it's just too damn long. It's far from as tightly paced as Hereditary and Midsommar were, but it did leave me with much more to chew on thematically than those two did. So overall, I really loved this movie, but it's... cut it down a lot more next time, Ari.
I am hiding from the cops. They're trying to catch me lacking.
Now this was an awesome movie. How to Blow Up a Pipeline is a non-stop rush of pure anger and angst, moving towards a powerful, incredibly resonant message. This is a movie that's mad at the world and not afraid to boldly express opinions and political stances that absolutely go against the grain. I really love how it's structured. The film clearly takes a lot of inspiration from the Safdie brothers' works, so basically once it starts going, it just goes and does not stop. It's structured very well, cutting between character backstories and the present, slowly revealing more and more of the larger story to you. It's very satisfying how all the events unfold. And it's just really great seeing a film this fiery and politically charged nowadays, that presents a real call to action. It's great stuff. The best MCU movie in ages doesn't even begin to cut it. Honestly, I'm ready to call this like the best one in general. It feels like it's been forever since we've got one of these movies made with even a fraction of the heart and love put into this one. The Guardians of the Galaxy films have always been a step above the rest of the MCU, and most of it comes down to the amount of personality and expression James Gunn brings to these movies and these characters. There are a lot of jokes in these movies that just don't land and go on for way too long, but it's made up tenfold by their real emotional centerpieces of love and friendship and family and the various different ways people express these feelings. I never doubted Gunn would pull off something special, not just for the final Guardians of the Galaxy film, but for his final outing at Marvel too. Volume 3 is such an incredibly emotional journey that comes from such a pure place of love for these characters, especially Rocket, who takes center stage in the story this time. It's shot incredibly well and really looked amazing visually. It was a real treat seeing this in IMAX. It's crazy to think that this came out the same year as Quantumania and The Marvels, when it feels like this one is decades apart in terms of quality. And I'm not ashamed to say that I did cry a lot at the end of this movie. I genuinely loved this. It's a beautiful send-off to this trilogy, these characters, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe as well, because this is probably the last movie they'll ever put out that's worth a shit. Once you get past some kind of bad Tumblr-esque dialogue and a few cringe jokes, there's that obligatory awkward gag that every fucking kids movie has. But once you get past all that, you get embraced by one of the most wonderfully unique and special animated films of the year. Thank God Disney passed on this, so the remnants of Blue Sky Studios were able to unleash their full, unchecked creative freedom on this beautiful movie. It's explicitly anti-authority, it's openly queer, it features an incredible blend of dystopian techno-future and medieval high fantasy. It's a total joy to see this whole story play out. It's smart, it's funny, emotional, lovable, it's a full bag. It's a really fantastic film. This is definitely one of the more subdued and subtle films of what I would say are like the really great films of the year from here on out, but I thought this was just gorgeous. It's a heavy-hitting look at narcissism and envy and jealousy. It follows basically the most miserable fucker on the planet as he continues to be miserable during his vacation. And I thought it was fascinating. It's a really fantastic character piece, and it blends its comedy and drama together perfectly. There were so many scenes and moments that I really resonated with emotionally. It's very well made, it's extremely well acted, it's just an incredible drama all around. I really loved it.
What the fuck, is that a fucking cat?
God bless you, Makoto Shinkai. You keep making the same movie over and over again, but this time it was almost as good as your name. All around, just a fantastic animated movie. It boosts eye candy visuals, lovable characters, some real emotional gut punches and strung throughout. It's a grand spectacle of massive ideas and huge set pieces, but it grounds itself within great smaller drama, based within its well-rounded characters. It's seriously such a beautifully animated film, really worth checking out.
This pizza is so good. Dad, I'm gay.
Yeah, that's how we do it.
I missed out on No Hard Feelings and Joyride, but between those two films as well as Bottoms, we really saw a big resurrection of the R-rated comedy this year. The best way I can think to describe Bottoms is as the Gen Z Superbad. It's raunchy, it's crass, it's absurd, and it's fucking hysterical. It treads such a perfect line, balancing its political and social commentary on one hand, without holding back for a second with the comedy. This is such a beautifully chaotic work, eccentric and bloody and horny as fuck. There's so much going on here, and it's just so much fun. Really fantastic movie. Absolutely love it.
I'm a Barbie girl in the Barbie world.
Believe it or not, this was the film that sparked the most political outrage and discourse more than any other film this year. Even more than the film about Native American genocide and the film about the creation of the atomic bomb. I don't know what I can say about Barbie that hasn't been said before. It feels like more than just a movie. It was an entire cultural phenomenon that basically dominated this entire year. And for good reason. Barbie was really, really great. On top of it being one of the most well-made comedies in a long while, with some incredible production design and costuming, with every performance being absolutely top-notch from Robbie, Gosling, and even Will Ferrell. It has an extremely important and strong message Greta Gerwig and everyone else involved with the project clearly deeply cared about. I was also very surprised at how emotionally impactful some of the scenes towards the end were. I don't feel like this movie is as one-sided as a lot of people made it out to be, and although it does get very preachy, I feel like it's a message that really needed to come across clearly, and Greta's direction gives the film so much personality. It really stands out on its own as an original work, despite being based on a pre-existing IP.
Barpa, barp, beep, beep, boop, robot noises.
Now I know some people might feel that this rating is way too high. The more mixed reception this film got is warranted. It is an extremely derivative mishmash of a dozen sci-fi tropes strung together by Gareth Edwards' direction. And it is also a remarkably bad time to release what is essentially a pro AI movie. But what can I say? I'm a sucker for this shit. It's basically if Steven Spielberg's AI, Apocalypse Now, the future war aspect of the Terminator films, and the second Renaissance segments from the Animatrix all had a baby, but with more than enough of its own personality to still stand on its own. Its plotting can be pretty janky at points, but as a whole, it just really hit for me. I've grown to really love Gareth Edwards' brand of sci-fi realism from Godzilla 2014 to Andor, and this really feels like him perfecting his craft. I thoroughly enjoyed this one.
It's me, Mario!
Now, when I first watched Ferrari, I felt it was somewhat uneven. There were many stretches of the film that I thought were extraordinary, but there were other parts where I just wasn't invested or completely checked out of it. Part of it being the heavy Italian accents that are hard to decipher sometimes, leading to missing story context and character motivations. But it really pulled me back in as soon as the race began and much of the built-up drama began to crescendo in many interesting ways. And as time went on, the more and more I thought about this film, it really clicked for me. Ferrari is a very fascinating biopic that basically inserts you into this extremely pivotal time in Enzo Ferrari's life, and lets you watch everything play out as a bystander on the sidelines. It's an incredibly somber deconstruction of a man torn apart by grief who is in a constant bind to try and push his emotions down, distracting himself with cars and racing. The racing scenes are of course a highlight, being beautifully photographed and extremely intense and immersive, and I love how these loud, pulse-pounding scenes contrast with the much quieter, overarching story of marriage and masculinity. It's not a film that's as immediately captivating as some of the higher-ranked ones on this list, but the more I think about it, the more I love it. And I'm really glad I knew nothing about this true story beforehand, because there are some big surprises for those who don't know what happens. It's also easily one of the best looking and best sounding movies of the year. Really fantastic film.
Kamen Rider, Kamen Rider, Rider.
What can I say? I fucking love Hideaki Anno. And between Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman, which I think are both masterpieces in their own way, I just love these damn movies. And Shin Kamen Rider is fantastic. Not all of it works for me, and it gets really bogged down in exposition, and while most of the action is incredible, there are a few action scenes that just look kinda shit, either being too visually dark or the editing being a bit too ADHD. But once it clicks, it's like nothing else. Japan truly understands what makes a good superhero movie. It perfectly translates most of the plot elements and stories from the original Kamen Rider series, of which I've seen like 3 episodes of, and completely revamps them for modern sensibilities while not forgetting the heart that makes it work in the first place. Per usual for Anno, many philosophical ramblings are playing out underneath the surface, meditations on happiness and the meaning of existence. It's somber and beautiful, and then in the next scene, Kamen Rider fucking punches a dude so hard in the head that it explodes. It's such a fun movie. Anno completely embraces the wackiness and weirdness of the series and isn't afraid to make more than just a rehash. It definitely works as its own thing. I love this movie. Saw fans, we are so back. The Saw franchise has been in a weird place for a bit. After Saw 7, which basically completed the massive, sprawling, interconnected torture porn soap opera series' long-running story, it broke from its yearly release schedule, and Lionsgate tried to fix what doesn't need fixing. Jigsaw and Spiral really tried to modernize the franchise, make it more accessible to newcomers while stripping out everything that made the original film so fun. So Saw 10 coming around, a massive return to form for the series, as well as an entirely Jigsaw-focused story, with the most Tobin Bell screen time we've ever gotten in one Saw movie. It's a fucking godsend. X has a bit of a slow start, but once the games begin, this Saw erupts into one of the smartest, captivating, and brilliant installments of the franchise. I had high hopes we'd at least get another fun gore fest with this one, but I seriously wasn't expecting some of the surprising emotional heights it reaches with John Kramer and Amanda's dynamic. It takes things way back to basics, which is much needed given how cartoonishly convoluted the later films got, with a much more character-focused story, and it returns to form as a thrilling, mostly one-room thriller. But of course, zero punches were pulled with the brutality of some of these traps. It's brutal as fuck, but it's also very unexpectedly sweet. It's a crazy blend of emotions that only this franchise could pull off so well. This was pretty much everything I wanted it to be, and I hope we get 10 more of these films. Loved this. Now going forward, these are what I would consider to be the absolute best of the year. These are all must-watches, and I can't recommend each of these films enough. So unabashedly its own thing, so visually bold and unique. At every moment, Lanthimos is drawing immediate attention to his direction. There's crazy camera angles, vibrant colors. This man uses the fisheye lens like no other. It presents a wonderful, dark fairy tale-like story of self-discovery. It's so wacky and whimsical and fun. Thematically, it's basically Barbie, like, on steroids. It has a strong message it really wants to get across, but it's not as preachy as that film was. But I certainly got the same, like, okay, I get it kind of feeling after a bit. It definitely overstays its welcome, and I feel like 10 to 20 minutes could have been shaved off, but overall, it's a damn treat seeing a film this different in theaters nowadays. It's visually stunning, it's brilliantly acted and directed, it's absolutely fantastic.
I'm from Waterloo, where the vampires hang out!
If The Social Network and an episode of Succession ever had a baby, its name would be Blackberry. Blackberry is a total blast. I've always been a huge fan of Matt Johnson. The Dirties especially is one of my favorite movies ever, so it's really awesome seeing that this has basically become his big break into the mainstream. It's an incredibly well-made, well-done corporate biopic, as they are now called. The whole movie felt very well researched, and there was a lot of interesting history about BlackBerry and the landscape and inner politics of cell phone companies from the 90s to the 2000s. Every performance was phenomenal, especially Glenn Howerton, who gives one of the most memorable of the year. It's just a very, very smart, very funny, engaging as hell story. I was really impressed and surprised by some of the heavy-hitting, dramatical heights it hits towards the end. It was a very fascinating, entertaining, and super fun movie.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can.
Across the Spider-Verse goes above and beyond to completely reinvent what the comic book movie is capable of. So it turns out it is possible to make a heavily fan service-centered film while also being able to tell an exceptional humanist superhero story, but it's just hardly ever handled nearly a fraction of as well as it's done here. No Way Home was a fun little forgettable romp by Marvel standards, but that flick is a wet fart in comparison to the scale and magnitude of Across the Spider-Verse. I didn't even know it was possible to top the 2018 film, but to explode past it in such a high degree is astounding. Truly one of the best auditory visual experiences I've ever had in a theater. It's such an exceptionally crafted superhero story that, while it's so huge and broad, feels so personal and character-driven. It's enormous in scale and overstimulating, but the quieter character bits and human aspect is given just as much of an emphasis as the huge action set pieces. There are some aspects to this film that are separate from the film that kind of sour my opinion on it a little, such as how abhorrently the animators were treated, how Phil Lord and Chris Miller were kinda terrible people behind the scenes, and how they went back, remixed, and re-edited much of the film's sound, cutting out what I think were really important lines and character moments for no reason. But aside from the behind-the-scenes drama, it's truly a remarkable feat of animation and creativity, and I really hope the ball isn't dropped with Beyond the Spider-Verse, and the Spider-Verse saga becomes like a perfect trilogy.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck?
I talked about this film in greater detail in one of my quick reviews, which I'll link below, but to summarize my thoughts on it, I thought this was just brilliant. It's incredibly grim and gross, but it balances its tone with moments of darkly comedic levity. It's a really fascinating character study with lots of really interesting commentary on ego and fame. It looks incredible. I really love the score. Each of the three main performances are among the best of the year. It's a really amazing, fucked up little movie, and I love it.
I like red, I like white, I like blue, I like all of them. Don't matter to me, I'm greedy.
A film of this artistic caliber and ambition coming out nowadays should be worshipped and celebrated by cinephiles. Killers of the Flower Moon left me genuinely awestruck. It feels like the ultimate culmination of everything Scorsese's filmography has been building towards. Intensely imposing and enormous in scale, yet it's so humanist and personal. This is a future classic without a doubt. This is easily one of Scorsese's bleakest and nihilistic outings. Greed is a demon that tears people apart and gets innocent people caught up in its violence. There are no happy endings or triumphant resolutions in sight. It's just an endless stream of just heartbreaking stuff. It also features career high performances from Leonardo DiCaprio and Robert De Niro, and if Gladstone does not get an Oscar for this, we're rioting. I definitely would not have minded an intermission halfway through, but it's such an intentionally paced and crafted film. I couldn't imagine removing or subtracting anything from it. It's utterly captivating and entrancing from minute one onward. I can't wait to revisit this again and again, which is extremely high praise considering that runtime. 80-year-old Scorsese is out here time and time again showing us all how it's done. Goddamn, what a picture.
Have a holly jolly Christmas. It's the best time of the year.
It is a bit of a trend nowadays for modern movies to really try and capture the visual aesthetic of older films with the film grain and the older looking title cards, but I haven't seen one do it as well as The Holdovers, and I don't think ever. The Holdovers feels like a film plucked straight out of the 70s, just ignoring the fact that there's a bunch of modern actors in it. It's just a wonderful, wonderful film. It goes without saying that we have a new Christmas classic among the ranks of It's a Wonderful Life and Die Hard. It's a lovely slice of life film that relishes in its simplicity. It's such a warm feeling movie. It's made with so much love and care and passion, and it just feels like the type of movie we don't get enough of anymore. It's also laugh out loud funny. It's really a full package of a movie. It just makes you feel very, very good.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Christopher Nolan's newest is without a doubt one that will go down in film history as one of the defining films of this decade. It's an expertly crafted, nuanced, and harrowing character study that delves into the mind of one of the most famous and important figures in human history. It truly feels like the culmination of Nolan's entire filmography, perfected and packaged into this one enormous opus of a film. The philosophical weight and maturity of this film is on a level completely surpassing anything he's done before. Cillian Murphy is just extraordinary, perfectly conveying a man both literally and figuratively, carrying the weight of the entire human race on his shoulders. It just moves ahead so strongly through its enormous runtime, posing question after question, brilliant scene after brilliant scene, building and building until it finally pays off in some of the most incredible ways. It also goes without saying, but this is possibly like the best made movie of the year, with Nolan's insistence on 70mm photography really paying off tenfold. With Ludwig's score absolutely putting the final nail, holding this enormous behemoth of a work together, this is one of the year's biggest crowning achievements without a doubt, and a total masterwork. I'll keep this briefer because at some point I am planning on making a full video essay on this film, but fuck. Talk to Me is absolutely a modern horror masterpiece. It's a vicious little 90-minute horror fest that, once it gets going, never stops for a moment to give you a breather. It's impeccably paced, genuinely horrifying, and an existential trip all at once. Many of the other films on this list, such as Oppenheimer or Killers of the Flower Moon, are by and large more important films than this, but I am a horror junkie, and Talk to Me encapsulates nearly all my favorite aspects that this genre has to offer. Spider-Verse is no longer the most gorgeously animated film of 2023. Miyazaki's quote-unquote final film is a fucking triumph. It proves once again that Miyazaki is the king of this entire medium. Now, I'll admit it, I was a bit cold on it on my first viewing. I found it to be a bit slow, mostly uneventful, and the ending was very abrupt. But on a second, once it clicked and I really understood what it was trying to accomplish, it immediately became a top-tier Ghibli film for me. It's so deeply meditative and personal, it's absolutely beautiful to look at. It fully encapsulates the best qualities of Studio Ghibli in presenting this vibrant and expressive world that feels so real and immersive and lived in. It's an intensely artistic piece that ponders on grief and legacy and simply what it means to be alive, but it also doesn't skimp out on being so fantastical and fairy tale-like, with so many memorable little creatures and characters and so much just gorgeous, gorgeous imagery and such a beautiful score. It just feels like you're watching the work of a master of his craft unfolding on screen. It's truly remarkable. Beautiful, beautiful film.
And if a double-decker bus crashes into us.
I'm very much unsure of what some of the middling reviews are talking about because I think this is easily a top-tier Fincher film. I gelled with this thing on so many different levels, expertly crafted and meticulously paced to such an insane degree. It's completely entrancing and almost impossible to look away or stop thinking about. Every single moment feels integral and absorbing, constantly moving towards something greater. Every part of Fassbender's performance gives way to new character insights, and per usual with Fincher, the technical aspects are off the chain here, with an equally masterful and subversively brilliant story at play to boost. It's so cold and methodical. There's this off-putting feeling that follows you throughout, and I found it to be so captivating. You can pick it apart and view it as a self-referential genre deconstruction, the antithesis of films like John Wick, or David Fincher parodying himself and his own style of ultra-perfectionist filmmaking. But honestly, I found it to just be one of the most remarkably engaging and thrilling things I've seen all year. It's a fucking crime against humanity that this was trapped as a Netflix original and not given the full theatrical due it deserved. It has future classic written all over it. I really believe that this is a masterpiece. This, in so many different ways, is absolutely not the film I was expecting it to be. Past Lives is a visual poem, a stunning exploration of the idea of love and the cosmic forces, or whatever you'd call it, that pulls people together in and out of one's life. It's a deeply existentialist film. It challenges the audience but doesn't turn into a basic will she won't she love triangle story. It's the type of film that'll leave you pondering your entire existence and every choice you've ever made in life to get you to the point you're at today. And on top of all its incredible thematic depth, it's also beautifully shot and powerfully acted. There's such a warmth and feeling of life that emanates from the screen in every moment. It's such an unsuspecting film that creeps up on you out of nowhere. It's just absolutely stunning. It's fucking unbelievable that this is Celine Song's first movie. Absolutely extraordinary. Next to Past Lives, this is without a doubt the most emotionally afflicting film for me, personally, this year. The Iron Claw is a mystifying subversion of the typical sports biopic. It's a story so deeply rooted in pain and tragedy that it feels almost too much at points. It's an emotional journey of brotherhood, an exploration of masculinity, an almost mythical Shakespearean tragedy, and it's a fantastic encapsulation of a very specific point in wrestling history. It's so much all at once, and as someone who isn't really all that big on the sport, I found it to be absolutely fascinating. I also made a quick review on this one where I shared my full thoughts on it, so if you want to hear them, I'll also link that video in the description, but awesome, amazing, incredible movie. Such an emotional experience. Now I want to say that these next 3 films are basically all on the same level for me. I'd say they're essentially tied for my favorite of the year, and whichever one I prefer in the moment basically depends on what mood I'm in, fucking the weather, the time of day, what I'm actively doing in the moment. But these 3 are my top favorite movies that came out in 2023.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. You're never gonna keep me down. I get knocked down.
When it came out, I was worried it was getting overhyped, but it surpassed all expectations I had for it. I was worried about the runtime, but then I ended up wishing it was even longer. I was annoyed about the possibility of this franchise getting Marvelified with all the news of TV shows and spin-offs, but now I want a dozen more sequels, series, and even more extended media connected to this universe. I just want more John Wick. I haven't felt this invested and emotionally connected to a big budget American blockbuster in ages. let alone the 4th entry in a franchise. Calling John Wick 4 another quote-unquote chapter is a goddamn disservice to this film. This is more than just another entry in the story. This is an entire blood-soaked opera, a Greek odyssey of bullet-riddled carnage. What Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves have accomplished with this franchise, from an almost straight-to-video Walmart bargain bin flick with a no-name director at the helm and career-fading star, to have crafted arguably the most consistent and greatest action saga of our generation, as well as changing the entire Hollywood landscape for action films forever, is bonkers to say the least. John Wick 3 Parabellum was snubbed hard, but if this doesn't at least get an editing or a cinematography nod at the Oscars, fuck them. The action reaches new heights for this franchise, which I didn't even think was possible after the insanity of 3. It pushes the limits of the gun-fu, slapstick, elevated reality fights you'd come to expect from John Wick tenfold. The final hour of this film, which stacks about 3 of the greatest action set pieces I've ever seen back to back, with somehow each one topping the last, was possibly the most fun I've ever had in a theater. All of which will go down in the history books as some of the all-time great set pieces in the history of action cinema. And on top of pushing the action the furthest it's ever been, it also pushes the level of storytelling and character further than what we've ever seen before. There were so many memorable side characters and minor performances. All the new additions to the series, Bill Skarsgård, Donnie Yen, Clancy Brown, Rina Sawayama, Shamir Anderson, Scott Adkins, all elevate this film to such a degree. There isn't a forgettable character or slow moment for a second. It's bursting with so much expression and personality, so many references to Lawrence of Arabia, Buster Keaton, The Warriors, westerns, to a heavily Barry Lyndon-inspired finale. It's like an entire celebration of cinema. There's just so much here, and it leans so far into its excessive nature and comedic absurdity, and it all just works so well. John Wick 4 is an insane, epic, operatic, and emotional journey, and I felt like it left me a changed man forever. I was shocked, I was riveted, I was laughing, and I almost cried about 4 different times. Cinema is alive and well, folks, and John Wick is its savior. I honestly can't believe that I had this strong of a reaction and this much love towards one of these movies. It's truly an incredible feat, and more American blockbusters should strive to reach this height. 37 movies. Over the course of 70 years, there have been 37 Godzilla films. Reboots, sequels, as well as TV shows, animation, video games, comic books, and so much merchandise. The level of iconography Godzilla is on is about the same level as Superman, William Shakespeare, Albert Einstein, Jesus Christ. Across the decades of its existence, the King of the Monsters has taken many shapes. An allegory for the horrors of nuclear weaponry, an anti-hero, an icon for children, a symbol of terror, the manifestation of nature's wrath revolting against humanity, all of which are more than valid interpretations of the character in their own way. But I strongly believe that with -1, we have the ultimate, definitive take on the character, as well as his best film yet. -1 is a triumph on all fronts. This is one of the few films in the series that really transcends being a quote-unquote really great Godzilla movie to just being a phenomenal work on its own. All the staples of the series are here once more. Big city destruction, Godzilla simply tearing shit up, and once again, all the classic musical themes you've come to expect are used again. And fortunately, on top of that, this film boosts without a doubt the most compelling, engaging human side to the story in this entire series. Remove Godzilla from this film entirely, and you'd still be left with a massively compelling World War II drama with an enormous level of heart and care put into crafting these characters. The film's themes of guilt and trauma, how the aftermath of the war is such an oppressive weight that looms over each of these characters, is powerfully delivered. I was immensely surprised by just how emotional the film left me. So many sequences and set pieces left me in awe. This rendition of Godzilla is possibly the best looking one. The human story is far beyond what I was expecting. In every way, this is seriously just an extraordinary film, And fuck, what a treat this was in IMAX. The film's technical elements are insane. This is a true grand sweeping visual spectacle. -1 represents the absolute best the kaiju subgenre has to offer, and I can't wait to see how this new series continues. I'm just so happy that this thing exists. This really feels like the definitive Godzilla films fans have been waiting for. It's beautiful, it's harrowing, it's fucking epic, it's an intensely personal anti-war opus masquerading as a giant monster movie. Now I know how audiences in 1954 felt after seeing the original. Saying that this is the best Godzilla movie doesn't even begin to cut it. This is truly a masterpiece. And this absolutely would have cut it as my favorite film of the year, if not for one other.
Well, a bitch can't get $1 out of me. No Cadillac, no perms, you can't see. Then I'm a motherfucking B.I.M.B.
Anatomy of a Fall feels most akin to this year's version of Tar. Like the masterpiece from last year with Cate Blanchett, not like the substance. It's an intensely bold and methodical vision that doesn't cut a single corner, and it's a brilliant character piece as well. It places so much trust in the viewer, slowly drip-feeding you information and allowing you to actively piece together the larger story as it's told, and it's presented in such a non-objective, fly-on-a-wall way that doesn't try to force your hand one way or another. It leaves you with so much to think about and discuss afterward. I knew this was going to be great, but I was not expected to be so grabbed by this narrative. It kept me thinking and engaging with the film to such a degree. Every line, every moment feels integral, and not a minute is wasted. It's the film that's constantly stayed at the forefront of my mind all year, constantly thinking about it and going back to it. I've had the best discussions and conversations about it with others. It feels like a film where a dozen different people can watch it and you'd get a dozen different views on it, different interpretations, different conclusions reached about the immensely ambiguous ending. It's remarkable seeing a film where so many people can have so many differing opinions on its subject matter and thoughts on the story. Throughout this entire year, I've been actively engaged and absorbed so deeply into this film's story, constantly thinking about it over and over and over again. And on top of all that, it's a remarkably well-made film from a technical aspect, with gorgeously photographed snowy landscapes and oppressive, claustrophobic courtrooms. Everything's captured by Justine Triet's eye incredibly well, all performed with what I believe are the most incredible, true-to-life, candid performances of the year. This is without a doubt the best courtroom drama I've ever seen, and it's absolutely destined to become one of the all-time great dramas just in general. It's an unreal achievement. So that was every 2023 film I saw ranked worst to best, and all in all, really great year for movies. Here's to hoping that 2024 is just as good. I know there's going to be fewer comic book movies at least, so that's a good sign. In terms of the movies I'm looking forward to, I'm really excited for Furiosa, Mickey 17 of course, oh fucking goddammit, Nosferatu, of course, and I think Godzilla x Kong looks like a lot of fun. And so that brings this video to a close. Feel free to comment what your favorites and least favorites of the year were, if you agreed with some of my rankings or really didn't. I lied at the beginning, I will read all the comments, don't worry. And I'll see you all whenever I get the free time to make another video essay. Thank you for watching. Oh, and I finally saw Dream Scenario last night. It's way too late for me to go back and re-narrate and re-edit chunks of this video, so I'll just say here that it's really awesome.